Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to get into the third part of the history of the Fed. Now, listen, guys, some of you look at this and go, well, that's not really NESARA. Yes, it is. Do you know how important the banking situation is? It affects every single person in the history of our modern nation. You guys, wake up, understand this is messing with you. People say banker wars. Guess what? They are banker wars, and they keep doing banker wars through the medical side. They do banker wars through major wars like World War One. They do banker wars on the media so that to mess with you. You have to understand the history of the Fed. So as we did this last time, again, you can go to Dr. Scott Young to get more information about things. We started off with the creation and the nation, creation of the nation to 1907. And what we talked about is this. We talked about the 14th Amendment under the fourth section. It says that no debt that you have that is settled by these idiots in DC is yours. Like that $35.7 trillion isn't yours. You don't have to pay it. That is constitutional. You know, bankers have been around for an incredible long time. 1792, they started up the Treasury, and Alexander Hamilton set up the first bank of the United States. By the way, the very first collapse of that bank was a direct result of bankruptcy. Most people don't realize that. 1836, we kind of moved away from it again. And we came back again and started up something unique under knocking out the money lenders with the Civil War. Civil War has much more, as much to do with freeing slaves of the black slaves, but freeing America. There's so much into that. And by the way, both sides had points of wrong that they were doing. The death of Lincoln is way weird. It doesn't make any sense. And until you realize the bankers were a part of that. The 14th Amendment sets out those penalties, and the ratification of the corporation is part of the problem with that too. Okay. Now, bank runs are just how they started to control it before we went to a gold-backed currency with that too. Okay, now part two, we talked about the Fed, and you have to go through the Titanic and realize the Titanic was sunk because they had to take out the three dudes, the three billionaires, in modern terms, the three billionaires who were against the Fed. This is one of the first and most major false flags in American history in 1912. And what it did is it set up what Wilson wanted to do is bring in the Clayton Act, which was a stronger monopoly law, anti-monopoly law, and that really wasn't as good as you think it is. They proposed lowering the tariffs, which allowed the central banks to flow in this interaction between the different nations with that too. And then the Federal Reserve. So they messed with our funds from the beginning. So 1914 to 1918, 30 million people die in World War I, and they created a debt throughout the world that couldn't be dealt with. In the same year that 1913 Fed comes in, you have the fraudulent IRS issue that comes on. And then they began to inflate the prices during pre-war period and post-war period of World War I to mess with the people, but it was a very gentle kind of part. And it is so in contravention of the Constitution of the first article under the 8th and the 10th section is that no state shall enter into a treaty or create money with another nation. So they are not allowed to create it. Only the Treasury was supposed to do this under gold and silver with that too. Okay, So we have Bloody Valentine 1929, which is another amazing false flag. All of it was trying to do is when it was another look away. Don't look at me, look away, because what I'm trying to accomplish is the beginning of the stock market crash. And of course, when the crash happens, it rocks the people all the way down to the core. But it doesn't just do this on a small level, it does it on a major level. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit hot here. As I kind of, speak up and get more into it. Okay, now let's talk into the gold standard and then 9/11. Okay, so we have the death of the gold standard. Most people think the death of the gold standard happens in 1971. No, it starts in 1933. FDR had stipulated that you had to turn in your gold in 1933 for a $10,000 fine. Now, to give you a concept of 1933, a $10,000 fine, think about like a $200,000 fine today if you didn't do what they wanted you to do. By the way, there's a thing called the FinCEN that is trying to happen by the end of this year, that only small business owners have to tell bunches of new information to Treasury that they frankly already have, so that we can be free of money laundering. It's supposed to be beneficial to us, but guess who is deleted from that response? Oh, political officers, bankers, accountants, venture capitalists, all the people who do money laundering. This is the same kind of silliness that they continue to do, because they seized the gold at $20.60 and it rose up to $33 within a year later. And even the Bank of France got screwed in this one. It created a fiat currency where it was tied to, most people don't understand this. The fiat currency is the institution of the Fed. It's the way that they wanted to come up to this. And you ask the question, why did we have to go off the gold standard? It's because we were broke. When you're on debt, let me pull this off the screen for just a half second here. When you live on debt and you start the debt cycle in 1913, there is a time lock period. It normally happens about every 20 to 30 years. And I've said this to people before, but they don't realize the nature of what that means. So for instance, it's 1913 to 33. It goes from 33 to 71, 71 to 99, 99, 99, 2000. And we're going to get to that part. And then 2000 up to 2020. We're so far past the red line. We should have been in the new debt cycle of the changeover. And the changeover is what the Fed really wants. CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, right? But something's amiss. Something's not changing it over. And that's called that white hat issues. And those white hat issues are coming on and messing with things. Now, I'm going to explain a lot more. I've gotten so many videos. Today is the 9th of September or November. On Saturday, I'm probably going to do about 3 videos today, and then you'll see them as we go along here. But I'm telling you, there are so many amazing things happening in the background, including the Fed having a freakout session. Okay, let's get back into the Fed a little bit. Fiat currency is like this embraced issue by economists. It talks about the concept of inflation and deflation. Inflation is just a stealing of your money. That's when someone else, see, if you have debt, you're taking out of your own personal budget to pay for things, to pay for something in the past, right? So you're taking out your personal budget that you need to buy a new car, for instance. But you can't buy a new car because you're spending on the past. Right? That's what debt happens. You see, in a business term, what happens to debt is that it's never calculated in the monthly figures. You see, you have your profits, then you have your expenses, and then you might have a gain. And let's just say a monthly gain, you made $1,000 in that month. But if you're in debt, what if you're paying tens of thousands of dollars toward debt issues? And some people are. I've been there in that time frame where I might have had $1,000 gain for that month, including in 2009, I had probably about $50,000 a gain, but I had so many more losses and you go, wait a second, but my books don't show the losses. The balance sheet will show the losses. Those are the debt payments that I was doing, and I was dying even though I had a $10,000 gain. It's partly because I didn't pay myself at all anymore. What happens, this is where we are. When you have a fiat currency, you are in a debt cycle, and that debt cycle just keeps going and going, and it stops. Well, guess what? The people that created the debt never pay for it. They just wipe it off the books. And this was that unique time frame of when they wiped it off the books in 1933. So what happens in that same time, by the way, 1913, they created the IRS, and then the IRS was supposed to die in 1933. Oh, wait a second. No, then they just re-upped it in a unique way, so everyone had to be involved with it, not just the 1%ers paying 1%. Okay. The Bretton Woods Conference occurs in 1944, deep inside of World War II. Understand, the war isn't finished, isn't fixed. If you understand what 1944 is about, we are invading Normandy in June of 44. Eisenhower had no idea if we were going to win that. We are stuck in Sicily, in southern Europe, in Russia or the Soviet Union. They're in the Battle of Stalingrad. In Japan, we were doing the island hopping, including, it would be later for Iwo Jima, but we had all these island hopping points that we would hit deep in those kinds of things. And yet they come up with the Bretton Woods Conference. So the money people are thinking way beyond that. So now that they've gotten out of the death of the gold standard and the fiat currency, what they had to do is peg the dollar so that the Fed could be the top dogs. So it became the petrodollar. They pegged the dollar to oil so that they could do this. Now, the other international people, to get them to do this, what they just said is, we'll pay you back in gold. And it stuck around $33 to $35 from 33 all the way, or 34 through 71. And so it made them turn in those currencies. But guess what? If you say that we're going to pay you in gold, there is a time lock period to that. Now, Judy Shelton, in her book, it's called Good as Gold. I'm going to see if I can angle it here so you can see it. Good as Gold by Judy Shelton. Very good book. She talks a lot about the Bretton Woods Conference. Okay. But one of the things that we don't spend any time on, and even Judy Shelton didn't talk about this, is the death of the gold standard in 33. That was even more important. It sets up the pace and what they would actually do post that time frame. So we were in a good period, in economic situations, but what they were doing is just chipping away. It's like seeing an ice sculptor guy, and he's working, and if you've ever seen it, it was real interesting. I've seen those at Estes Park in Colorado, and I mean, when you watch them, they're cutting away, and you barely can understand what they're creating. That's what the Bretton Woods Conference is. It's about in the middle of that sculpture. Now, in 71, of course, we have Nixon bringing us off the gold standard. The ounces of gold goes from 35 to 68. all the way through the 80s. And in the 80s, the rest of the world had a massive liquidity crisis. Now it starts in 71 because they have these, they do the oil issue. So there was an oil embargo, all through America in 71, all the way around 71, 72. What would happen is, you drive up to a gas station and you couldn't even get more than 4 gallons. This was a big problem, but it was again, focus over here while we do something in the background. Another false flag event with that too. And so the bankers were making a running ton at that kind of situation, up to $68 and higher all the way through the 80s with that too. But they could increase the inflation, which would increase the interest rates, which made banks just so much more money because less and less people were saving and more people had to spend. So they were making tons of cash. The IRS does it this way, and I've explained this, but I need to bring this through into this kind of time frame. If you pay your $10,000 amount, making up a number, right? You pay it to the IRS, and they take their cut. To make it semi-legal, they send their money over to Treasury, and that's why the IRS is called the Department of the Treasury. Now, some people will say it only happened in the last couple of years. No, it's been going on for a while, okay? But it was only to make it legal, to make it seem legal, actually. Now, that cut then goes to the Fed. So once these two idiots take their cut, the Fed jumps in and takes its cut. So 6% of every dollar that comes into the Fed is paid to the Queen of England. Now, you're going, well, the Queen died. Again, it's the institution of the Queen. I don't care if it's idiot King Charles. It is the Brits jumping in and trying to make the money, because remember, and I'm going to pull this off the screen for half a sec. Remember, and you can listen to Dr. Jan Halper Hayes, and you have Derek Johnson talking a little bit about this. But there are 3 main heads to this beast. Okay, that's why it's not the mark of the beast yet. We're not in the Antichrist kind of things. But there are 3 beasts here. It's the religious head of the Vatican. It is the banking head of the City of London. We're not talking about London proper. We're talking about a 1 mile square radius that no one has access to. That's the banking head of London issues. That's where all the money gets shunted to. That's why I say the Queen, she's getting a huge cut, but it's going to all of their nefarious activities worldwide. And thirdly, it's the head of the government, and it's called the DC head. And what that is, and that's why DC has so many cabal / Freemason references all over the place, because that's what their God is about. Okay? So the money, 6% goes just to the Fed banker points and what that they want to do, the 13th Fed banks. Now I'm going to do a video that shows Jerome Powell saying that I wouldn't step down if President Trump would make me. Guess what? He's not going to have a choice when we change this thing. Now, the rest of the percent is taken by to pay the interest. At this second, and it can be changing as we go, $4.7 trillion of tax revenue to the $35 trillion of debt. I mean, you don't have enough money to pay for everything. It's barely paying for interest. At this rate, we're sitting at 14-15% just paying for interest payments. We're not even touching the debt issues. We're just paying for interest. See, the cabal can't keep going this way. Now, click the right area here. Then that money moves to the U.S. Mint, which on average, and it's less and less on a physical level, but about $6 trillion are printed physically, and then $25 trillion in now, sometimes more. I wish I could give you the exact number, but we've lost track of that exact number of what they're doing. They're not telling us. In digital creation. Now, realize this. 90% of all transactions are digital. If you write a check, that's a digital transaction. If you use a credit card, that's a digital transaction. Now, I know people get all upset about this. QFS is a block or is a distributed ledger blockchain. It's going to have a digital component to allow people to do it, but it will have a physical component. Physical. Has nothing to do with central bank digital currencies. That's what they would want to do. That's the switch that they would wish. But the QFS is going to have something even better than that. And they hate it. Now, they take the US Mint. See, by here, we've already devalued the currency because we've already taken out so many cuts of this money that we have an inflation. This is already known. I'm not telling you something that any economist, if they paid attention to a little bit, they would understand. And then it floats right back to you. And then here's what happens. Fiat currency has no value. It just is valued inside of a system. We could utilize, this is a remote control, right? What if little tiny remote controls would be the new fiat? That we traded in these kind of little tiny remote controls. We could. That's how worthless this thing is. It's just a chosen representation. But see, it's even more fun for them, and it's a basic middle finger to the rest of the world that it doesn't even have the value of a stupid remote control. That at least has some physical components, right? They make it a digital kind of thing, and that's what they want to do. Interesting. All right. The 70s through 9/11, there is a massive increase of the price of gold. Again, it goes from 35 up to 68 and on a very short time frame through the 70s, which messes with the inflation, creates more debt. Now, it messes with the buying power of the average worker. People ask me all the time, like, how does the gold-backed currency actually do a good thing for me? You guys, if they did nothing else, I'm not saying this is true. If they did nothing else but go to a gold-backed currency, and they didn't even release your debts, if you just went to a gold-backed currency and you turned inflation to zero, the nation would instantaneously change overnight. That's only one piece of NESARA. You can't, and by the way, you just can't do that because it deletes the Fed instantaneously, which then deletes the IRS because they have no more power anymore because you're turning back the clock to pre-Fed issues before the Fed existed. Oh, ooh, yuck. They hate that. And then what would happen is that everyone from the billionaires to the person who is the poorest on the street would start to see their abilities to rise. Every person all the way through and through. But see, what they did is they created more class warfare by having extra billionaires, millionaires, and then billionaires rising up with that too. The increase of speculation came farther and farther, especially through the 90s. And they started speculating on things that had zero value, like the dot-com industry. I mean, people were seeing, that you could do particular things with websites, and that's where the dot-com point comes from. And it was nothing. There's an example of a person who, by a financial planner, and his name is Dallas, if you've ever heard of him. And Dallas is a friend of mine, and he was talking about a woman who was getting, let me see here if I can explain this here. She was getting like $350,000. Again, I'm not sure the exact number. I'll pull this off the screen for half a second. So Dallas telling a story is about $350,000 she's supposed to get. He spent months and months planning with her how she would prepare herself so she could, necessarily quit her job after they got the savings worked up and all these other vehicles to happen. She goes to California, and I swear to you, he says 3 days later, she walks away and she has $75,000 left. And he goes, "What did you do?" He goes, "Well, she didn't gamble it away. She didn't use it on porn. She didn't use it on prostitutes or whatever, all the different things that you would think of. She spent over $100,000 on a website or $75,000 on a website that never even materialized. She spent $100,000 for internet interchange groups that would be influencers in her life. What for? This is unfortunately what happens with that too. That's the speculation that kind of stuff comes up. And people were spending like drunken sailors at this time frame. I remember in 2000, I was putting in money, and I was putting in $600 a month in my my simple IRA. I was losing money every month, and I didn't know what to do about this. I was in a more speculative kind of things, trying to do some growth issues. And my boss even said, "Hey, Scott, you got to back out of some of those areas." Well, I didn't know who to talk to, right? And I was losing money in this time frame. Fascinating how it worked. But it was the way that they wanted to steal more and more from me. Think the 29 stock market crash. We had another crashing event, and it would only stop when we had 9/11. Let me set up the stage here of what occurs. On Clinton still in office he would still be in office up until January of 2001. In the backdrop of this, we have Gore and Vice President Gore from Clinton's side, and Bush. It's a hotly contested race throughout America. In Florida and Broward counties and a few other counties that were happening down there. Oh, Dade County, excuse me. They had this thing called the hanging chads. So instead of a digital counting, what happened is they would have this little clip, and it would just have this little hanging thing of saying who that you voted for. So it was trying to do like a new type of method. And people walked out, and is this planned? They walked out and said, "I don't even know who I voted for." And this went all the way through December of 2000 before Bush was declared the winner. See, this would have gone to a January 6th event. They didn't want it to happen. So SCOTUS ruled, and they said, "Well, Gore, you're just going to make billions of dollars." And he did. And Bush did too, right? They made friends on this way. So one of the things that happens is that Clinton in September of 2000 is told by the military to sign the NESARA agreement. The NESARA agreement, just like the Fed happens in December of 1913, NESARA goes through House and into the Senate. It comes up to the president, and it was signed into law. But no one will ever hear about this. This is some of the stuff that they've been wiping from the internet. Next phase is that we move into the Bush era. The day that Bush and Cheney is out of the White House is the day before 9/11. First off, the president and the vice president are not supposed to be out of the White House at the same time because there might be an event that they need to be on. Bush is in Florida, of all places, at a school, and Cheney is in the air. But who comes in is Poppy Bush, his dad, who was president from 88 to 92 and vice president through Reagan era, and by the way, a very massive pedophile. And he comes in and signs away that first attempt of NESARA. What was in those buildings, and we'll talk about that in a second, is some fascinating stuff. Not even a day later, still on the same day, the DOD fails another audit. And that audit is failed so massively, $3.2 trillion they stole from the systems. Where did they steal it from? The gold and the setup of what would happen of NESARA. They stole that money out of there, and no one spent any time on because it was right before the 9/11 situation. In Florida, Bush hears of 9/11 while the towers are falling. They just defy every structural point. Now, we could do videos on this, but there have been, it's called 9/11 truthers. This is where we kind of come up with the term that we're talking about today. And these are structural engineers that go, listen, a building doesn't come down in that way. Do you know that 3 months before 9/11, Building 7, who was done by Larry Silverstein, was reinsured for $3 billion. He cashed in a couple months after. When you look at Building 7, it falls in 7 seconds and it never got hit by an airplane. It was just supposedly a fire. World Trade Center 1 and 2, if you've ever seen those, and I'm going to pull this off the screen for half a second. Now, let's go back in time. 9/10, I remember very clearly because the Denver Broncos, my team, I'm living in Denver at the time, they're playing the New York Giants on Monday Night Football. Ed McCaffrey, the wide receiver for Denver, he breaks his leg. And I mean, it's just this really ugly break where his lower leg is flopping badly, right? My wife and I both see it at the time. She's not a big football fan, but she knows the circumstance. Now, in the morning, I have to get to the office at 8:30. I drive from the southern Denver area all the way through some of the difficult traffic, the fifth worst traffic in America, right? And it takes me an hour and a half to drive there and then an hour and a half to drive home every single day. Lots of people have done this kind of thing. I turn on the TV. I'm like, hey, can you turn on the TV? We had a TV at the time in our bedroom. By the way, don't do that. But we had a TV, turn on the TV. I'm like, let's see how Ed McCaffrey is. So she clicks it on. It's, I don't know, what, 6 in the morning or something like that, 7, 8 in the morning. I don't remember the exact time frame. The first plane has already hit World Trade Center 1. Okay? And then the next trade center gets hit while we watch it. And it's crazy. And as soon as it hit, there was an audible buzz throughout the world. Like everyone saw it for real and they said, this isn't an accident. Because they were talking about terrorism. They didn't know anything about it. Obviously they did. And it changed. Now I get ready to leave because I know I've got to leave. By the time I get through to the office an hour and a half later, both trade centers towers are gone. Later in the day, Trade Center 7 goes down as well. This is the craziness that comes out. What was in those were the gold for the gold-backed currency, the JFK files in Building 7, and the computer systems that would have flipped this over. And now some of you are going to go, I just don't believe it. Fine, don't believe it. I don't care if you don't believe it. But I'm telling you, that's the kind of stuff that happened. And they covered it up. That's the backdrop of where we get to. Okay, so that was part 3. Part 4 will be the Great Recession all the way through the 2020 and 2021 crisis points. And then we'll have a part 5 as well. Guys, this is really important stuff. You need to be watching this. You need to be sharing this with your friends because you need to understand what has been happening around us. Thanks so much.